The room went dead silent. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every glass froze halfway to someone's lips. Even the ventilation system seemed to hold its breath. 200 people in dress blues and formal military attire all turned to stare at me, the woman in the back corner who wasn't supposed to matter. My sister Sarah's promotion ceremony had been going perfectly. She was glowing in her crisp uniform, finally getting the recognition she'd worked so hard for. The recognition our family had always believed she deserved. The recognition I was never meant to receive. And then Commander Reynolds walked into that room, scanned the crowd, and his eyes landed on me. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "General Martinez, you're the general. Before I tell you what happened next, let me take you back to where the story really begins, because the truth is, sometimes the person your family thinks they know best is the person they've never really seen at all." Hi, I'm Alex Martinez, and for the past 15 years, my family has believed I'm a failure. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family or misunderstood by the people who should know you best, please hit that subscribe button. Your support means everything, and it helps stories like this reach people who need to hear them. To understand what happened in that ceremony room, you need to understand the Martinez family. We're military through and through. 4 generations of service, discipline, and unspoken expectations that hang in the air like morning mist at Fort Bragg. My father, Colonel Miguel Martinez, served 3 tours in Afghanistan before taking a position training new recruits. My mother, Major Elena Martinez, was a logistics coordinator who could organize a supply chain in her sleep. My younger brother Diego is a captain in the Marines, stationed in Japan. And then there's Sarah. Sarah is everything a military family could want in a daughter. Valedictorian at West Point, rapid promotions, commendations for excellence, leadership awards, the kind of soldier who makes parents' chests swell with pride at dinner parties. She's also my baby sister by 18 months, though you'd never know it from how our family talks about us. Let me paint you a picture of what family gatherings were like for me. Sarah just got promoted to major, my mother would announce to whoever would listen, her voice bright with satisfaction, youngest in her battalion to reach that rank. Nods of approval all around the table, toasts raised, stories shared about Sarah's latest achievement, her latest recognition, her latest everything. And then someone would inevitably ask, "And what about Alex?" The pause. Oh, that pause. It lasted just long enough for everyone to remember that yes, there was another Martinez child, the one they'd rather not discuss. "Alex is finding her path," my father would say diplomatically, in the same tone you'd use to describe someone with a chronic medical condition. Finding her path. That was code for dropped out of the Naval Academy, after 2 years, and we still don't understand why. Here's what my family knew about my story. I'd been accepted to the Naval Academy, with a full scholarship. I'd done well my first year, not Sarah level exceptional, but solid. Then something happened during my second year. I became distant, my grades slipped, and one day, I simply withdrew from the academy. No explanation, no discussion, just packed my bags and left. To my family, this was incomprehensible. The military wasn't just our profession, it was our identity, our purpose, our way of life. Leaving the academy wasn't just quitting school, it was abandoning everything we stood for. But they didn't disown me. The Martinez family doesn't work that way. They accommodated the disappointment, made space for it at the dinner table, learned to work around it in conversations. After leaving the academy, I'd drift in and out of their lives. I'd show up for holidays sometimes. Other times I'd call with an excuse about work, keeping me busy. I had a job, something vague in government consulting, that I never elaborated on. I lived in a small apartment in Virginia, drove a modest car, and seemed to live a modest life. Not the life of someone who'd thrown away a prestigious military career, but not exactly thriving either. Such a waste, I overheard my aunt whisper to my mother once. She had so much potential. Had, past tense. As if at 28, my potential had already expired. Sarah, meanwhile, continued to rise. Every promotion felt like validation for my parents. Proof that they'd raised at least one daughter right. Proof that military excellence ran in the Martinez blood, even if it had somehow skipped over me. I want to be clear about something. I never resented Sarah's success. How could I? She earned every commendation, every promotion, every moment of recognition. She worked harder than anyone I knew, maintained standards that would break most people. And she genuinely cared about the soldiers under her command. Sarah was extraordinary. She deserved every accolade she received. But watching your family celebrate someone else's achievements while treating your own life as a cautionary tale, that does something to you. It makes you question whether you matter. Whether you ever matter. Whether the space you occupy in the world is significant enough to justify your existence. If you've ever felt like the black sheep in your family, drop a comment below. You're not alone in this feeling. And your story matters too. The thing about being written off by your family is that you start to internalize their narrative. You begin to see yourself through their eyes, as the disappointment, the one who couldn't cut it, the cautionary tale they tell when they want to remind each other how important it is to stick with things. I started believing I really was a failure, but here's what my family didn't know. Here's what they couldn't know. Because the truth was classified at a level that doesn't officially exist. I didn't drop out of the Naval Academy. I was recruited. During my second year at Annapolis, I'd caught the attention of someone who wasn't supposed to be there. Someone who was evaluating midshipmen for a program that had no name, no official designation, and definitely no recruitment booth at the career fair. It started with small things, extra aptitude tests that weren't part of the regular curriculum, one-on-one sessions with instructors who asked unusual questions about ethics, moral flexibility, and how I'd handle situations where standard military protocol might not apply. I thought I was being remediated. The sessions felt like I was being tested for weaknesses, evaluated for whether I belonged at the academy at all. Turns out, I was being tested for something else entirely. The conversation that changed my life happened in an office that wasn't on any academy map. The woman sitting across from me wore civilian clothes but carried herself with military precision. She had kind eyes, and the sort of presence that made you want to confess things you'd never told anyone. "Alex," she said, "what I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room, not now, not ever. Do you understand?" I nodded, though I didn't understand anything. There are threats to our national security that conventional military operations can't address, situations that require unconventional approaches, people who can think outside traditional parameters while maintaining absolute loyalty to their country. She slid a thin folder across the desk. "You have a choice to make. You can continue at the academy, graduate with honors, and have a distinguished traditional military career, or you can disappear from this life entirely and serve your country in ways that will never be acknowledged, never be celebrated, and never be understood by the people who love you." I opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper with two options. Option A: continue Naval Academy education, graduate, serve honorably in conventional military capacity. Option B: withdraw from Naval Academy, enter classified program, serve country through unconventional means. Family and friends will believe you quit. You will never be able to correct this misconception. Look, I know how this sounds. I know it feels like something out of a movie, but I need you to understand, there are people serving our country right now, whose families think they're failures, whose children think they abandoned them, whose parents think they couldn't cut it. The cost of protecting freedom isn't always paid in blood, sometimes it's paid in reputation. I stared at that paper for what felt like hours. Option A meant staying in my family's good graces. It meant living up to expectations, making my parents proud, following in the footsteps of 4 generations of honored military service. Option B meant letting everyone I loved think I was a quitter. It meant carrying their disappointment for the rest of my life. It meant sacrificing my reputation for a truth I could never tell. But option B also meant serving my country in ways that might actually make a difference, fighting threats that most people would never know existed, using skills I didn't even know I had to protect people who would never thank me because they'd never know I existed. I thought about my father's stories from Afghanistan. The frustration in his voice when he talked about enemies who didn't wear uniforms, who didn't follow conventional rules, who disappeared into civilian populations, and struck when you least expected it. "We need people who can think like them," he'd said once. "People who can get inside their heads, understand their strategies, anticipate their moves." I looked up at the woman across from me. "If I choose option B, what exactly would I be doing?" She smiled, not a recruiting smile, but something sadder. Something that looked like recognition. "You'd be saving lives in ways that no one will ever know about. You'd prevent disasters that will never make the news, because they never happen. You'd serve your country more effectively than most generals. But you'll never have a rank that anyone recognizes." I signed that paper, and with my signature, I chose to let my family think I was a failure for the rest of my life. The withdrawal from the Naval Academy was handled cleanly. My grades were documented as slipping due to personal adjustment issues. My departure was processed as voluntary withdrawal with no academic disciplinary action. To anyone reviewing my record, it would look exactly like what my family believed: a promising young woman who simply couldn't handle the pressure. I was given 2 weeks to figure out what story I'd tell my family. The program would arrange for my civilian life, an apartment, a job that would explain my income without providing any real details, a social security number that would check out but lead nowhere important. "The hardest part," my recruiter warned me, "isn't the training, it isn't the mission. It's going home for Christmas and letting your father think you're a disappointment." She was right. The training was intense but manageable. 6 months of learning skills that weren't taught in any military manual. Languages, psychology, advanced technology, tactical planning, that involved thinking 3 moves ahead of enemies who were already thinking 3 moves ahead of us. I learned to disappear into crowds, to read people's intentions from their body language, to gather intelligence that could prevent attacks before they were even planned. I learned to be a ghost in the machine of national security. But going home for holidays, that nearly broke me. "So what are you doing now?" Sarah asked during my first Christmas back. She was in her dress uniform for a family photo, looking radiant and accomplished. "Government consulting," I said. The cover story I'd been given. Like what kind of consulting? "Paperwork mostly, policy review, really boring stuff." She nodded with the kind of polite disinterest you show when someone's job is too mundane to discuss further. Meanwhile, I just spent the previous month in Eastern Europe, working with local intelligence to identify and neutralize a terrorism cell that was planning to target civilian infrastructure, but I couldn't tell her that. I couldn't tell anyone that. This is the thing about Secret Service to your country, and I don't mean Secret Service, I mean service that's actually secret. The people who love you start to see you as smaller than you really are, because they can only see the cover story. They can only see the mundane life you're pretending to live. My first major operation came 8 months after I'd quit the academy. Intelligence had identified a human trafficking ring, operating out of a port city in Southeast Asia. The ring was using shipping containers to transport women and children to buyers across 3 continents. Local law enforcement was either compromised or ineffective. Traditional military intervention wasn't an option because officially we couldn't operate in that region. But a single American tourist with the right skills and the right contacts could gather intelligence, identify key players, and coordinate with local activists to expose the operation in a way that would shut it down permanently. That tourist was me. For 3 weeks I lived in a hostile city where speaking the wrong words to the wrong person could get me disappeared. I documented the trafficking routes, identified the key players, and gathered enough evidence to coordinate simultaneous raids in 4 countries. 47 women and children were rescued. The trafficking ring was completely dismantled. 3 government officials who had been taking bribes were arrested and prosecuted. The operation never made international news. There was no ceremony, no commendation, no recognition, but 47 people were free because I'd been there. Meanwhile, Sarah called me that same week to tell me about her promotion to captain. My parents were so proud they'd taken out an ad in the local paper. "You should think about getting back into the military," my father said during that call. "Sarah could probably help you figure out a path back in. It's not too late to turn things around." Turn things around, as if my life needed fix, as if what I was doing didn't matter because he couldn't see it. I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever done something you were proud of? Something that mattered, but you couldn't tell the people you love about it? Maybe it wasn't classified work. Maybe it was helping a friend through something private, or making a difference in someone's life in a way they asked you to keep quiet about. Drop a comment if you know what it feels like to carry achievements that no one else can see. The operations continued. Some lasted days, others months. I prevented a bioweapon attack in Central Europe by infiltrating a research facility and copying data that led to the arrest of 3 scientists who were selling samples to terrorist organizations. I spent 4 months in South America, posing as a journalist while gathering intelligence on a cartel that was funding international terrorism. Each mission felt like saving the world in small, invisible ways. But each family gathering felt like confirming their worst opinions about me. Alex just seems lost. I overheard my mother tell my aunt during Sarah's engagement party. She's almost 30 and still living in that tiny apartment, working that dead-end job. I don't know where we went wrong with her, where they went wrong. As if my life was a mistake they'd made instead of a choice I'd made to serve something larger than myself. Sarah's wedding was particularly difficult. She looked stunning in her dress uniform, surrounded by friends and colleagues who respected her, admired her, saw her as the leader she was. Her maid of honor gave a speech about Sarah's dedication, her integrity, her bright future. I sat at the family table, wearing a simple dress that wouldn't draw attention, listening to toast after toast, celebrating my sister's excellence. When people asked what I did for work, I gave my standard vague answers and watched their interest evaporate. "Your sister's really something special," Sarah's new brother-in-law said to me at the reception. "You must be so proud." "I am," I said, and I meant it. "Are you in the military too?" "No, different path." He nodded and moved on to more interesting conversation partners. Different path. That's what my life had become, the path they couldn't understand, couldn't celebrate, couldn't even really see. But here's what I was learning about invisible service. It changes you in ways that visible service can't. When no one can see your achievements, you have to find ways to be proud of yourself that don't depend on external validation. You have to develop an internal compass that points toward what's right instead of what's recognized. The work continued. A mission in Eastern Africa where I helped coordinate the peaceful resolution of a border dispute that could have escalated into regional warfare. 6 months in Central Asia gathering intelligence on nuclear material that was being sold on black markets. An operation in Western Europe where I helped identify and neutralize a network of extremists who were planning coordinated attacks across multiple countries. Each mission had a body count that never happened, disasters that were prevented, lives that were saved. But my family saw none of it. They saw a woman approaching 30 with no clear career trajectory, no husband, no children, no traditional markers of success. They saw someone who'd had potential and wasted it. The worst part was that I started to see myself through their eyes sometimes. When you're surrounded by people who view your life as a disappointment, it's hard not to internalize that narrative. There were nights when I'd come home from missions that had literally prevented international crises, and I'd sit in my small apartment wondering if I'd made the wrong choice. What if I'd stayed at the academy? What if I'd chosen the conventional path? Would I be happier living a life my family could understand and celebrate? But then I'd get the next assignment, and I'd remember why I'd chosen this path. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March. Sarah had been selected for promotion to lieutenant colonel, a significant jump that would put her on track for full colonel before she turned 35. The ceremony would be held at Fort Bragg, with family and military dignitaries in attendance. "You'll come, won't you?" my mother asked. It would mean so much to Sarah, and to us. "Of course," I said. I wouldn't miss it. But here's what my family didn't know about the timing of Sarah's promotion ceremony. Here's what they couldn't know. 3 days before the ceremony, I'd returned from an 18-month operation in Southeast Asia, 18 months of deep cover work, infiltrating an international arms dealing network that was supplying weapons to terrorist organizations across 3 continents. The operation had been the most complex of my career. I'd posed as a logistics coordinator for a shipping company, slowly building relationships with key players in the network, while gathering intelligence on their suppliers, their buyers, and their distribution method. For 18 months, I'd lived as someone else entirely. I'd learned to think like them, talk like them, anticipate their moves and counter their strategies. I documented their entire operation while appearing to be a loyal part of it. The intelligence I'd gathered led to coordinated raids in 7 countries. The entire network was dismantled in a single week. Enough weapons to supply a small army were seized before they could reach terrorist buyers. The operation had a code name that I can't share, but the after-action report credited it with preventing what intelligence analysts predicted would have been multiple large-scale terrorist attacks across Western Europe and North America. In other words, I just completed the most significant mission of my career. A mission that likely saved hundreds, possibly thousands of lives. And now I was going home to watch my family celebrate Sarah's promotion while continuing to view my life as a failure. I sat in my hotel room the night before the ceremony, looking at myself in the mirror. I'd been gone for 18 months, and my family had barely noticed. A few phone calls, a couple of text messages, but no real concern about where I'd been or what I'd been doing. Meanwhile, Sarah's promotion had been planned for months. Hotel reservations, dinner arrangements, coordinated family photos. Her achievements mattered enough to build events around. I want to be clear, I didn't resent the attention Sarah received. She deserved every bit of recognition she got. But sitting in that hotel room, I felt the weight of 15 years of carrying achievements that no one could see. The promotion ceremony was held in the main auditorium at Fort Bragg. The room was filled with military personnel in dress uniforms, family members in their best clothes, and dignitaries who understood the significance of Sarah's achievement. I sat in the back, wearing a conservative navy dress that wouldn't draw attention. My parents sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Sarah looked radiant as she stood with the other officers being promoted. The ceremony followed traditional protocol. Each officer was called forward individually, their achievements read aloud, their new rank announced. When Sarah's name was called, I could see my parents' faces glowing with satisfaction. Major Sarah Elena Martinez, the presiding officer, announced, for exceptional leadership, distinguished service, and unwavering commitment to excellence, you are hereby promoted to the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. The applause was thunder. Sarah's colleagues stood, my parents wiped away tears, and for a moment, everything felt right with the world, and then Commander Reynolds entered the room. I knew who he was immediately, though we'd never met in person. Commander James Reynolds, Naval Intelligence, one of the few people who knew about the program I'd been part of for 15 years. He wasn't supposed to be there. His presence at Sarah's promotion ceremony made no sense unless his eyes scanned the room systematically, the way intelligence officers are trained to assess environments. When his gaze reached the back row, he stopped. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the recognition dawning on his face. Then he did something that made my blood freeze. He started walking toward me. The room was still buzzing with celebration from Sarah's promotion. People were standing, applauding, taking photos. No one was paying attention to the naval officer making his way through the crowd toward the back row. Except me, I was paying very close attention. Commander Reynolds moved with purpose, his path direct and unalterable. He wasn't being social, he wasn't networking, he was on a mission. He stopped directly in front of me. The conversations around us continued. My parents were still celebrating with other family. Sarah was still accepting congratulations on stage. But Commander Reynolds stood at attention and raised his hand in a crisp military salute. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying just far enough to be heard by the people immediately around us. "General Martinez." General. The word hit the room like a sonic boom. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. The applause faltered and then died completely. Commander Reynolds continued, his voice clear and formal. "It's an honor to see you again, General. I wanted to personally thank you for your service on Operation Nightfall. The intelligence you provided saved countless lives. The silence that followed was the kind of silence you feel in your bones. The kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat, your own breathing, the weight of every unspoken question hanging in the air." 200 people were staring at me, including my family. My father's mouth was slightly open, his expression frozen somewhere between confusion and shock. My mother had dropped her program, and it had scattered on the floor at her feet. Sarah stood on the stage, still in position for photos, but her smile had vanished. And me? I stood frozen, trapped between 15 years of maintaining a cover story and the sudden, impossible reality that my cover had just been blown by a naval commander who apparently didn't know it was supposed to remain intact. I want you to imagine this moment. Imagine 15 years of your family thinking you're a failure, 15 years of carrying achievements you can never share, 15 years of watching them celebrate someone else while treating your life as a cautionary tale. Now imagine all of that being stripped away in a single sentence. General Martinez. I returned Commander Reynolds' salute, because training took over when shock paralyzed everything else. It was an automatic response, muscle memory from 15 years of military protocols that my family had never seen me practice. Commander Reynolds, I acknowledged, my voice steadier than I felt. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important, he continued, apparently oblivious to the fact that he'd just detonated a nuclear bomb in the middle of my sister's celebration. I wanted to express my gratitude for your work on the Southeast Asia operation. The network you dismantled. The intelligence estimates suggest your work prevented multiple large-scale attacks. Exceptional service, ma'am. More silence. Deafening, suffocating silence. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Did he say General?" Another voice. "Martinez? Isn't that her family name?" Sarah stepped down from the stage, her new lieutenant colonel insignia catching the light. She walked toward us with measured steps, her face unreadable. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "I think there's been some mistake. This is my sister Alex. She's not in the military." Commander Reynolds looked confused. He glanced at me, then at Sarah, then back at me. "Ma'am, I don't understand. You're General Alexandra Martinez, aren't you? 15 years of classified service. Most recently Operation Nightfall in Southeast Asia. This was the moment I'd been dreading for 15 years. The moment when my two worlds collided and I'd have to choose which truth to tell. But looking at my family's faces, the confusion, the dawning realization, the years of misunderstanding suddenly clicking into place, I realized I was tired of carrying their disappointment. I was tired of being invisible. I was tired of letting them think I was a failure. "Yes," I said simply, "I'm General Martinez." The words hung in the air like a confession. My father took a step forward, his face cycling through expressions I couldn't read. "Alex, what is he talking about? You left the Naval Academy, you quit." "No, Dad. I was recruited." "Recruited for what?" I looked around the room. 200 pairs of eyes were focused on me, waiting for an explanation that I wasn't authorized to give. "Classified operations," I said finally. "The kind that don't officially exist." Commander Reynolds suddenly seemed to realize that he'd stumbled into a family situation. "Ma'am, I apologize if I've spoken out of turn. I wasn't aware that your service was compartmentalized from your family." Compartmentalized. That was a polite way of saying completely secret. Sarah was still staring at me like I was a stranger. "You've been in the military this whole time?" "Yes." "For 15 years?" "Yes." "And you never told us?" "How do you explain to your family that you chose to let them think you were a disappointment, rather than risk compromising national security? How do you tell them that their opinion of you was a sacrifice you made for your country?" "I couldn't tell you," I said. "It was classified." My mother found her voice. "Classified at what level that you couldn't tell your own family?" Commander Reynolds answered before I could. "Above top secret, ma'am. General Martinez has been involved in operations that are known to fewer than 20 people in the entire government." My father repeated, as if the word didn't compute. "You're a general?" "Brigadier General," Commander Reynolds confirmed. "One of the youngest in the history of U.S. intelligence." I watched my family try to process this information. 15 years of thinking they knew my story. 15 years of treating me like a disappointment. And suddenly they were learning that everything they believed was wrong. But more than that, they were learning it in front of 200 people, at what was supposed to be Sarah's moment of triumph. The ceremony had completely derailed. The presiding officer was trying to figure out how to regain control of his event. The other families were watching our personal drama unfold like it was entertainment. And Sarah Sarah looked like she was watching her entire understanding of our family structure collapse in real time. "I think," said the presiding officer diplomatically, "we should perhaps continue this conversation in a more private setting." He gestured toward a smaller conference room adjacent to the main auditorium. My family followed like people in a daze, along with Commander Reynolds, who was beginning to look like he regretted his decision to acknowledge me publicly. The conference room felt smaller than it was, made claustrophobic by the weight of 15 years of secrets suddenly exposed to daylight. We sat around a small table, my family on one side, me on the other, Commander Reynolds looking increasingly uncomfortable at the head. "Alex," my father said finally, "I need you to explain what just happened out there." So I told them. Not everything. I couldn't share operational details or specific missions, but I told them about the recruitment, about the choice I'd made, about the cover story I'd been living for 15 years. I told them about the operations I couldn't name, and the lives I'd saved that they'd never know about. I told them about coming home for holidays and letting them think I was a failure because the truth was classified above their clearance level. I told them about sitting at family dinners, listening to them celebrate Sarah's achievements while carrying my own achievements like stones in my chest. The room was quiet while I spoke. No one interrupted. No one asked questions. They just listened to 15 years of truth spilling out like water from a broken dam. When I finished, the silence stretched for what felt like hours. Finally, my mother spoke. "All this time, we thought. You thought I was a failure," I finished. "I know. But why couldn't you tell us something? Anything?" Commander Reynolds answered. "Ma'am, the security protocols for General Martinez's program are extreme. Any hint that she was involved in classified work could have compromised not just her safety, but the safety of other operatives and the success of ongoing operations. So you let us think our daughter was a quitter," my father said, his voice heavy with something between anger and grief. "I let you think whatever you needed to think to keep you safe," I said, "and to keep other people alive." Sarah hadn't spoken since we'd entered the room. She sat perfectly still, her new lieutenant colonel insignia a reminder that this was supposed to be her day. "Sarah," I said gently, "I'm sorry this happened during your ceremony. This was your moment, and I never wanted to take that away from you." She looked up at me, and for the first time in years I couldn't read her expression. "Take it away?" she said quietly. "Alex, you just completely changed everything I thought I knew about our family, about you, about the last 15 years. She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Do you know what it was like, thinking I was the only successful daughter? Do you know the pressure that put on me? Do you know how many times Mom and Dad held me up as an example of what you could have been if you'd just tried harder?" I hadn't considered that perspective. I'd been so focused on carrying the burden of their disappointment that I hadn't thought about the burden I'd placed on Sarah by default. "I'm sorry," I said. "I never wanted to put that pressure on you. But you did, and now I find out that while I was working my ass off to make them proud, you were already," she gestured helplessly, a general, Alex. "Do you know what I had to do to make Lieutenant Colonel? Do you know how hard I've worked for every promotion, every commendation, every piece of recognition?" Her voice was rising, emotion finally breaking through her military composure. "And you've been a general this whole time, a general. While I was struggling to prove myself worthy of our family legacy, you were already at the top of yours." This was the conversation I'd been dreading most. Not the one with my parents, but this one, the one where Sarah realized that everything she'd worked for, I'd already achieved. Where she learned that while she was climbing the ladder, I was already at a level she might never reach. "Sarah," I said carefully, "my path and your path are completely different. What I do, what I've done, it's not better than what you do, it's just different." "Different?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're a general at 33 years old. Do you know how extraordinary that is? Do you know how impossible that should be?" Commander Reynolds cleared his throat. "If I may, the general's rapid advancement was due to the unique nature of her service. Traditional promotion timelines don't apply to her program." "What program?" my father asked. "What exactly has she been doing for 15 years?" I can't give you specifics, Commander Reynolds said, but I can tell you that General Martinez has been involved in counterterrorism operations, international intelligence gathering, and prevention of threats to national security. Her work has been significant. Significant. That was intelligence speak for saved thousands of lives. But we can't tell you how. My mother was crying quietly. Not sad tears, exactly, but the tears that come when your understanding of reality shifts so fundamentally that your emotions don't know how to respond. All this time, she whispered, we were worried about you. We thought you were lost, struggling, that we'd somehow failed you as parents. You didn't fail me, I said. You raised me to serve something bigger than myself. That's exactly what I've been doing. But even as I said it, I knew the damage was done. 15 years of family dynamics don't shift overnight. 15 years of thinking your daughter is a disappointment can't be erased by a single revelation. And more than that, I could see the guilt starting to settle on my parents' faces. The realization that they'd spent 15 years treating their highly decorated daughter like a failure. Commander Reynolds stood up. I should go. This is clearly a family matter, and I've already said more than I should have. He turned to me. General, again I want to thank you for your service. The Southeast Asia operation will be studied for years as a model of successful intelligence work. Then he left, leaving my family and me alone, with 15 years of misunderstandings and the rubble of our previous assumption. The silence that followed was different from the stunned silence in the auditorium. This was the quiet of people trying to rebuild their understanding of each other from the ground up. I have questions, my father said finally. I probably can't answer most of them. Try me. So we talked. For 3 hours we sat in that conference room, while I answered what questions I could, and deflected the ones I couldn't. I told them about the loneliness of carrying secrets, about the difficulty of maintaining relationships when half your life was classified. I told them about the times I'd wanted to call them from foreign countries but couldn't, because my location was classified. About the times I'd been injured on operations but couldn't seek medical care that would create a paper trail. I told them about watching Sarah's career from a distance, feeling proud of her achievements while simultaneously carrying the weight of my own invisible accomplishment. But mostly I told them about the choice I'd made 15 years ago, and how I'd had to live with the consequences of that choice every single day since. Do you regret it? My mother asked. The choice you made? I thought about it. Really thought about it. No, I said finally. I don't regret serving my country. I don't regret the work I've done, or the lives I've helped save, but I regret the cost. I regret the distance it created between us. I regret letting you think I was a failure. You never let us think anything, my father said quietly. We chose to think it. We made assumptions based on incomplete information, and we treated you accordingly. He was right, but that didn't make it hurt less. Sarah spoke up. What happens now? Now. I mean, what happens to our family now? Do we just pretend the last 15 years didn't happen? Do we start over? How do we move forward from this? It was a good question. How do you rebuild relationships that were built on fundamental misunderstandings? How do you trust each other again, when one person has been living a completely different life than the others believed? I don't know, I admit. I'd like to try to rebuild things between us, but I understand, if that's not possible. I understand if you're angry about the deception. I'm not angry about the deception, my mother said. I'm angry at myself for not seeing it, for not recognizing that something else was going on, for not trusting that we raised you better than to just quit when things got difficult. That hit harder than anger would have. Their disappointment in me had been painful, but their disappointment in themselves for not seeing the truth was somehow worse. You couldn't have known, I said. The cover story was designed to be believable. It was supposed to look exactly like what you thought it was. But we should have known you, Sarah said. We should have known that quitting wasn't in your character. She was right. They should have known that. But intelligence work is specifically designed to exploit the fact that people see what they expect to see, believe what makes sense within their existing framework of understanding. My family had expected a story that made sense to them. When I left the Naval Academy, the most logical explanation was that I couldn't handle the pressure. When I lived a modest civilian life, The most logical explanation was that I was struggling to find my path. They never looked for evidence of a secret military career, because secret military careers don't exist in most people's frameworks of possibility. The conversation continued as the afternoon turned to evening. We covered 15 years of missed connections, misunderstood communications, and family dynamics that had been built on false premises. But slowly, something else began to emerge. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a willingness to try to understand each other moving forward. As we prepared to leave the conference room, Sarah pulled me aside. "I need you to know something," she said. "All those years when I thought I was the successful daughter, the pressure was enormous. I felt like I was carrying the weight of our entire family's military legacy, like I had to be perfect because you couldn't be." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "But now I realize that while I was feeling that pressure, you were carrying something much heavier. You were carrying real responsibility. Life and death responsibility, and you were doing it alone." I could see the respect in her eyes. Not just the acknowledgement that I outranked her, though I did, but genuine respect for the burden I'd been carrying invisibly for 15 years. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." "I have one more question," she said, "and I need you to be honest with me. Okay, did you ever resent me for getting all the recognition while you carried all the real responsibility?" I thought about all the family dinners where Sarah's achievements were celebrated while mine remained invisible. All the times I'd sat quietly while my parents bragged about their successful daughter and made excuses for their disappointing one. Did I resent her? Sometimes, I admitted, not for being successful. You earned every bit of recognition you received. But sometimes I resented that your achievements mattered to them in ways mine never could. She nodded. "I can understand that. But Sarah, I need you to understand something too. Your achievements do matter. What you've done, the way you've served, the leader you've become, that's real and valuable and important. My path doesn't diminish yours," and I meant it. Sarah had built her career through visible excellence, transparent leadership, and earned recognition. That was its own kind of courage, its own kind of service. We were different kinds of soldiers, but we were both soldiers. The reception after Sarah's promotion ceremony was awkward in the way that family gatherings become awkward when everyone's understanding of the family has just been fundamentally altered. People congratulated Sarah on her promotion, but the conversations kept drifting toward questions about me. Family friends who had known us for years suddenly didn't know how to talk to me. "So you're actually a general?" my cousin Maria asked, as if she was still trying to make the words make sense. "Yes. And you have been for, how long? A few years. And we just never knew." "No, you never knew." These conversations happened over and over throughout the evening. Family members, family friends, people who had known me my entire life suddenly realizing they didn't know me at all. Some handled it better than others. My uncle Roberto pulled me aside at one point. "Alex, I owe you an apology." "You?" "Yes, I do. Last Christmas, I told your father that maybe you needed tough love. That maybe you were too comfortable being supported by the family without contributing anything meaningful." He looked embarrassed. "I suggested that maybe it was time to cut you off, force you to figure your life out." I remembered that conversation. It had happened while I was in the kitchen, getting drinks for everyone. I'd heard every word. "Uncle Roberto, you were working with the information you had. But I should have trusted that there was more to the story. I should have trusted you." That phrase kept coming up throughout the evening. People apologizing for not trusting that there was more to my story than they could see. But how could they have known? I'd spent 15 years specifically ensuring they couldn't know. The most difficult conversation was with my grandmother, my father's mother, who had always been particularly disappointed in my failure to launch. Abuela had served as a nurse in the Korean War, and military service was sacred to her. My apparent abandonment of the Naval Academy had been a source of genuine grief for her. "Mija," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "all this time, I thought you had dishonored our family's tradition of service." Abuela was 86 years old, and her opinion of me had been a source of pain for 15 years. She'd never said anything cruel. But I could see the disappointment in her eyes every time she looked at me. I know, abuela, but you were serving all along. You were serving in ways I couldn't even imagine. She took my hands in hers, her fingers trembling slightly. I am so proud of you, Misha, and I am so sorry for doubting you. That conversation broke something open in my chest that I'd been keeping locked away for 15 years. Abuela's pride, her recognition of my service, meant more to me than any commendation I'd ever received. Because for 15 years, I'd believed that the people who loved me thought I was a failure. And now I was learning that they'd never stopped loving me. They'd just been disappointed in what they thought was my choice to give up. But there was another side to these conversations, a darker side that emerged as the evening went on. Some family members struggled with the revelation not because they were proud, but because they felt betrayed. My cousin David, who had followed a traditional path through the army and was currently a major, had a different reaction. So while I was working my ass off to make captain, you were already a general? He said, his voice carrying an edge of resentment. David, it's not the same, isn't it? We're all military, we all serve, but somehow you got fast-tracked to the top while the rest of us followed the rule. This was a conversation I'd been dreading. The one where other military family members felt like my rapid advancement was somehow unfair to their own service. I didn't get fast-tracked, I said carefully. I took a different path with different requirements and different risks. What risk? Sitting behind a desk, analyzing intelligence? I couldn't tell him about the physical risks, the times I'd been in genuine danger. The operations where I'd barely made it out alive. That was all classified. The work I do is different from conventional military service, I said. It's not better or worse, just different. But I could see that David wasn't satisfied with that answer. And I could understand why. From his perspective, he'd been grinding through traditional military hierarchy, earning each promotion through years of dedicated service, while his cousin had somehow jumped ahead through a program he'd never heard of. It wasn't fair, none of it was fair. Not to David, not to Sarah, not to me, not to my parents, who'd spent 15 years thinking they'd failed as parents. But fairness isn't really the point when it comes to national security. The point is effectiveness, and sometimes effectiveness requires sacrifices that seem unfair to everyone involved. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing outside the reception hall with my father, looking up at the stars over Fort Bragg. I have something to tell you, he said quietly. What's that? About 6 months ago I ran into Colonel Peters from the academy. You remember him, he was your tactical instructor during your first year. I remembered Colonel Peters. Tough, fair, demanding. He'd pushed his midshipmen harder than most instructors, but he genuinely cared about their development. He asked about you, my father continued. Asked how you were doing, what you'd ended up pursuing after leaving the academy. I had a feeling I knew where this was going. I told him the truth as I understood it, that you'd struggled with the pressure, withdrawn from the academy, and were working in some kind of civilian consulting job. My father paused, watching a transport helicopter pass overhead. Colonel Peters got very quiet. Then he said something strange. He said, Roy, I think you might be missing part of the story. Colonel Peters knew. Of course he knew. He would have been briefed when I was recruited, told that I was withdrawing for classified reasons. When I pressed him, he said he couldn't elaborate. But he said that sometimes the most important service happens in ways that can't be publicly acknowledged. My father looked at me. I should have listened to him. I should have trusted that there was more to your story. But that was the thing about my cover story. It was designed to be more convincing than hints and suggestions. It was designed to override doubt, to provide a simple explanation that would satisfy curiosity and prevent further investigation. Dad, you couldn't have known. The whole point was that you couldn't know. But I should have trusted you more. I should have believed that the daughter I raised wouldn't just give up. We stood in comfortable silence for a while, two soldiers sharing the quiet understanding that military families develop over generations of service. What happens now? He asked finally. Now I go back to work. This doesn't change what I do or why I do it. And with us? With the family? That was the harder question. How do you rebuild relationships that were built on false foundations? How do you trust each other again when so much has been hidden for so long? I'd like to try, I said. I'd like to see if we can find a way to be a family again, knowing what you know now. We never stopped being a family, Alex. We just misunderstood each other for a while. Maybe that was true. Maybe family isn't just about understanding each other perfectly. Maybe it's about loving each other even when understanding is incomplete. Maybe it's about forgiveness, both asking for it and offering it. The next morning, I was scheduled to fly back to Washington for debriefing on the Southeast Asia operation. My work continued, classified and invisible as always. But something had changed. For the first time in 15 years, my family knew that my life had meaning beyond what they could see. Sarah called me as I was packing. I wanted to thank you, she said. For what? For letting me have yesterday. Even after Commander Reynolds revealed everything, you made sure the focus stayed on my promotion. You didn't try to make it about you. I hadn't really thought about it that way. But she was right. Even after my cover was blown, I'd tried to keep the spotlight on Sarah's achievement. It was your day, I said. You earned it. Maybe, but I also wanted to tell you something else. What's that? Growing up, I always wanted to be like you. Even after you left the academy, even when everyone said you'd given up, part of me still admired you. That surprised me. Sarah had always seemed so confident, so self-assured. I'd never imagined she'd looked up to me. Why? Because you never seemed to care what anyone else thought. You went your own way, lived your own life, made your own choices. I envied that independence. If only she'd known how much I'd cared what they thought, how much their disappointment had hurt, how many nights I'd laid awake wondering if I'd made the right choice. Sarah, I cared what you all thought more than you'll ever know. Maybe, but you didn't let it stop you from doing what you believed was right. That takes courage. We talked for a few more minutes before I had to leave for the airport, but that conversation stayed with me during the flight back to Washington. For 15 years, I'd carried the burden of my family's disappointment, but maybe they'd been carrying their own burdens, the pressure to succeed, the weight of family expectations, the guilt of misunderstanding someone they loved. Maybe we'd all been doing the best we could with incomplete information. The debriefing in Washington was routine. Success of the operation, lessons learned, areas for improvement, the kind of analytical discussion that happens after every major intelligence operation. But halfway through the meeting, my supervisor, Director Sarah Chen, asked an unexpected question. General, I understand there was an incident at a family event where your cover was compromised. My stomach dropped. I'd been dreading this conversation. Yes, ma'am. Commander Reynolds recognized me at my sister's promotion ceremony and addressed me by rank in front of approximately 200 people. In your family? They now know I'm active military, but no operational details were disclosed. Director Chen nodded thoughtfully. How do you assess the security risk? This was the question that could end my career. If my family's knowledge of my service was deemed a security risk, I could be reassigned to conventional duties. No more classified operations, no more invisible service. Everything I'd sacrificed for could disappear because a well-meaning naval officer had recognized me at the wrong time. I assess the risk as minimal, I said carefully. My family has no knowledge of specific operations, methods, or contact. They understand that my service is classified and have agreed to maintain appropriate discretion. And your psychological assessment? Director Chen was asking whether the revelation would affect my ability to continue operating under deep cover, whether maintaining family relationships would compromise my effectiveness as an intelligence operative. I believe the resolution of this tension will actually improve my operational effectiveness, ma'am. The psychological burden of maintaining the deception was becoming significant. She studied me for a long moment. General, in your 15 years of service, you've completed 17 major operations with 0 security breaches. Your psychological evaluations have consistently noted the strain of maintaining family relationships under cover. Our analysts have wondered if that strain might eventually become a liability. I hadn't realized they'd been monitoring that aspect of my service so closely. The fact that this revelation happened through no action of your own, and that you managed it without compromising operational security, suggests that we might benefit from a new approach to family cover stories for long-term operatives. Was she saying what I thought she was saying? Ma'am, we're going to try an experiment, General. You'll continue your operational duties, but with a modified cover story that allows for limited family knowledge of your service. We want to see if reducing that psychological burden improves long-term effectiveness. I couldn't quite believe what I was hearing. Not only was I not being reassigned, but my situation was going to become a test case for other operatives struggling with the same family deception issues. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me yet. This means you'll be under increased scrutiny. Any security breach, any hint that family knowledge has compromised operational security, and you'll be transferred to conventional duties immediately. I understood. They were giving me a chance, but it came with zero margin for error. Understood, ma'am. The meeting concluded with assignments for my next operation, 6 months in Eastern Europe, working with local intelligence to track weapons smuggling across multiple borders. But for the first time in 15 years, I'd be able to tell my family that I was going overseas for work. Not the details, but at least the basic fact that I'd be away. It was a small thing, but it felt revolutionary. 3 weeks later, I was back at Fort Bragg for a small family dinner. No ceremony, no crowd, just my parents, Sarah, and me, sitting around the dining room table where I'd eaten countless meals while carrying secrets I couldn't share. The conversation was different now, not easier exactly, but more honest. How long will you be away this time? My mother asked when I told them about the upcoming assignment. About 6 months. Where? Europe. I can't be more specific than that. She nodded, accepting the limitation without pushing for details. It was strange, being able to acknowledge that I was going on assignment without having to make up a cover story about consulting work or training seminars. Sarah had brought a bottle of wine to celebrate her promotion, and we toasted her advancement over dinner. To Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez, my father said, raising his glass, for excellence in leadership and dedication to service, and to General Alexandra Martinez, Sarah added, surprising me, for 15 years of invisible service and sacrifice. We drank to both toasts, to visible achievement and invisible achievement, to conventional service and unconventional service, to the different ways we'd each chosen to serve our country. After dinner, Sarah and I walked through the neighborhood where we'd grown up. The streets were quiet, lined with modest houses, where military families raised their children with values of duty, honor, and service. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd chosen differently? Sarah asked. You mean if I'd stayed at the academy? Yeah, if you'd followed the conventional path. I'd thought about this question for 15 years. What if I'd chosen option A instead of option B? What if I'd prioritized family relationships over classified service? Sometimes, I admitted, I think about what it would have been like to serve openly, to have my family proud of my achievements, to build relationships without carrying secrets. But I also think about the operations that might not have succeeded, the lives that might not have been saved, the threats that might not have been neutralized. It was the fundamental trade-off of invisible service, personal relationships versus operational effectiveness, family approval versus national security. Do you think you made the right choice? I looked around the neighborhood where we'd grown up, thinking about all the families sleeping peacefully in their beds, protected by threats they'd never know about, defended by people they'd never meet. I think I made the choice I could live with, I said finally. We walked in comfortable silence for a while, two sisters who had both chosen to serve but had taken very different paths to get there. Alex, can I ask you something personal? Sure. Are you lonely? All those years of carrying secrets, maintaining cover stories, not being able to share your real life with anyone. Wasn't that incredibly lonely? It was lonely, crushingly, overwhelmingly lonely sometimes. Coming home from operations that had required everything I had to give, and not being able to tell anyone what I'd done or why it mattered. Yes, I said, it was very lonely. But worth it? I thought about the women and children rescued from trafficking range, the terrorist attacks that never happened, the weapons that never reached their intended targets, the intelligence that prevented international conflicts. Yes, worth it. Sarah nodded, and I could see her trying to understand a kind of service she'd never experienced. Service without recognition, achievement without acknowledgement, sacrifice without support. "I don't think I could do what you do," she said quietly. "And I don't think I could do what you do," I replied. Leading openly, being responsible for people who can see you and judge you and hold you accountable. That takes a different kind of courage. We were different kinds of soldiers, but we were both soldiers. We'd both chosen to serve something larger than ourselves, just in different ways. As we turned back toward our parents' house, Sarah asked one more question. "What's next for you?" "Next? I mean, now that the family knows, now that you don't have to carry that secret anymore, what changes?" It was a good question. What had changed when you'd spent 15 years living a double life and suddenly half of that burden was lifted? "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm still figuring that out." But as we walked back to the house where our parents were probably cleaning up dinner dishes and discussing their two daughters who had both chosen military service, I realized something had already changed. For the first time in 15 years, I felt like I belonged in my own family, not because they understood everything about my life, they didn't. And they never would, but because they finally understood that my life had meaning, even if they couldn't see all of it. That understanding, that recognition, that basic respect for the choices I'd made, it was more valuable than any medal I'd ever received. 3 months into my European assignment, I got a call from Sarah. "Alex, I have news. Good news or bad news?" "Good news. I've been selected for the Advanced Strategic Leadership Program at the War College." The War College. It was one of the most prestigious military education programs in the country, reserved for officers who were being groomed for the highest levels of command. "Sarah, that's incredible. Congratulations." "Thanks, but that's not why I'm calling." "No, I'm calling because I wanted you to be one of the first people to know, not because it's a big achievement, but because you're my sister and I wanted to share it with you." That might sound like a small thing, but it was. For the first time, Sarah was sharing her success with me, not as an obligation or out of family duty, but because she wanted to include me in her joy. It meant she saw me as someone worth including, someone whose opinion mattered, someone who could appreciate her achievement. "I'm proud of you," I said. "You've earned this." "I know. And Alex?" "Yeah? I'm proud of you too, for everything you've done, everything you're doing, everything I don't even know about." After we hung up, I sat in my small apartment in Prague, looking out at a city where I was working to prevent weapons from reaching terrorist organizations. And I felt something I hadn't felt in 15 years. I felt like both of my identities could coexist. The sister who was proud of Sarah's achievements and the general who was serving her country in ways that couldn't be acknowledged. For 15 years, those identities had felt incompatible. Being effective as an intelligence operative seemed to require sacrificing my relationships with my family. Being a good daughter seemed to require abandoning my service to my country. But maybe that was a false choice. Maybe it was possible to serve invisibly while still maintaining connections to the people who mattered most. Maybe family love was strong enough to survive in complete understanding. 6 months later, I returned from Europe to attend Sarah's graduation from the War College. This time, when I sat in the audience watching her receive recognition for her achievements, I wasn't carrying the weight of my own invisible accomplishments. I was just proud of my sister. After the ceremony, we took family photos, real ones, with all of us together. No one cropped out or excluded. My parents stood between their two daughters, one whose achievements were public and celebrated, one whose achievements were classified and invisible. But both daughters were serving, both daughters were contributing, both daughters were making their parents proud. Later that evening, at the reception, a young lieutenant approached me. "Excuse me, ma'am, but aren't you General Martinez?" I glanced around, making sure no one else was listening. "Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. I was part of the team that processed the intelligence from your Southeast Asia operation, the weapons you prevented from reaching terrorist organizations. One of the planned targets was a school near where my family lived." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "You probably saved my nephew's life, and he'll never know your name, never know what you did, but I know, and I wanted to thank you." Then he walked away, disappearing back into the crowd of celebrating family. That's the thing about invisible service. Sometimes you get reminders that it matters. Sometimes someone who knows just enough to understand the significance of what you do takes a moment to acknowledge the sacrifice you've made. But most of the time, you serve in silence, trusting that the work itself is its own reward. As I write this, it's been 2 years since Commander Reynolds revealed my identity at Sarah's promotion ceremony. 2 years since my family learned that their failure of a daughter was actually a decorated general. The adjustment hasn't been easy for any of us. There are still moments when my parents struggle with the guilt of having misunderstood me for so long. There are still conversations where I have to deflect questions about my work, because the details remain classified. But we've found a new equilibrium, a way of being a family that accommodates classified service and visible service. Invisible achievements and public recognition. Sarah was promoted to colonel last month. I was able to attend her ceremony. And this time when people asked about my career, I could say military intelligence without having to deflect to consulting work. It's a small thing, but it matters. My parents have stopped apologizing for the years of misunderstanding. They've stopped trying to make up for lost time. Instead, they've focused on moving forward with the relationship we can have now, knowing what we know. And me, I'm still serving in ways that can't be publicly acknowledged, still preventing disasters that won't make the news because they never happen, still carrying achievements that matter more for their invisibility than their recognition. But now I'm doing it with the knowledge that the people who love me understand that my life has purpose, even if they can't see all of it. That understanding doesn't make the work easier, but it makes the sacrifice more bearable. If you're watching this and you're serving in ways that your family can't understand, whether it's classified work, or volunteer service, or caring for someone in ways that don't get recognized, I want you to know that your service matters, even if no one sees, even if no one celebrates it, even if the people you love think you're failing because they can't see how you're succeeding. Your invisible achievements are still achievements. Your quiet service is still service. Your unrecognized sacrifices are still meaningful. And someday, if you're lucky, the people who matter most will understand that you've been exactly where you needed to be, doing exactly what you needed to do, even if they couldn't see it at the time. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt misunderstood by your family, or if you're serving in ways that don't get recognized, please subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment about your own experiences with invisible service, because the more we talk about these experiences, the less alone we all feel. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for letting me share what I could share about a life that's mostly classified. And thank you for understanding that sometimes the most important service happens in the shadows, performed by people whose names you'll never know, but whose work protects everything you hold dear. Until next time, this is General Alexandra Martinez, reminding you that your service matters, whether anyone can see it or not.